It should look very familiar at the same time.
I think your mic's off as well, just as FYI.
Alrighty. Yeah. Every once in a while, I'm on time. Okay.
Every once in a while.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom.
All right. Cantor, you have a nice week?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
I think things are, starting to lighten up, and I think is daylight savings time this weekend? Yes. See, I need to be prepared for that. I have a meeting on that. I'm excited for it to be light at this time.
This is great.
Yeah. Right, because they don't change.
They don't change. That's right.
Yeah. 3? I thought it was just Arizona now. No? Wow.
Just to make things confusing, right?
course.
Why not make things simple?
Well, it's funny because Australia, they have a different date as well. So it's for us that we have like a 4-hour difference, but it's actually like to 6 hours because it goes in that direction. Because their sun is going down more, ours is coming up, and it's
Right. So for the Dornfelds who may not know, so Cantor Kevin's, could we say certainly girlfriend,
Girlfriend,
very
yes.
significant.
Yes.
Happens to be Australian and coming back and forth and all of that stuff. So, whatever that time difference is, I can't even
16
conceive
hours.
of. Might as well be.
Who's counting?
Yeah. And also a belated but a very wonderful happy birthday to Steve. 80? 18. We're going to say 18.
18. Happy 18.
No. A
21st?
very wonderful 80, Steve. Okay, and we say in tradition, Ad Mea Ve'esrim, which is until 120. Okay, so you got a while. Okay,
Yeah.
we got a while to enjoy, but
Mazel
really,
tov.
mazel tov to you, and we're glad you're back in town. Yours was on
Hey.
Tuesday.
Birthday
Happy
filled
birthday
week.
to you, Linda. We won't start throwing out ages here.
We won't
I
ask,
know better
yeah.
than to do that, but but that's wonderful. And Eva's birthday this week. Also, my daughter turned 7.
Hey, it really
Yeah,
is a
no, I
birthday
think there's
filled
something
week.
about March. Seems to
Yeah.
have that, March Madness.
March
There
Madness,
you
there
go.
you go.
That's what it's really about, people. That's what it's
Spring,
really about.
no?
Something. Yes, I imagine that's true. All right, so we're going to get started with lighting and blessing our Shabbat candles. Did you guys get Sidors on your way? Okay, perfect. We're on page 120. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat. We'll turn now to page 130 as we begin Kabbalat Shabbat together. Again, page 130 at the top of the page.
Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena l'Adonai. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena l'Adonai. Naria לצור אישנו, נקד מפנה בתודה. Naria לצור אישנו, בזמירות נריע לו. לכו נרננה, לכו נרננה, לכו נרננה לאדוני. לכו נרננה, לכו נרננה, לכו נרננה לאדוני.
We'll turn to the adjoining page, page 131, Psalm 96.
ישמחו השמיים, ישמחו השמיים, ישמחו השמיים, ותגל הארץ. ישמחו השמיים, ישמחו השמיים, ישמחו השמיים, ותגל הארץ. ירם הים, ירם הים, ירם הים, אלוהי. ירם הים, ירם הים, ירם הים, אלוהי. ישמחו השמיים, ישמחו השמיים, ישמחו השמיים, ותגל הארץ.
We'll turn now to page 132 towards the bottom of the page.
שירו לאדוני, שירו שיר חדש, שירו לאדוני כל הארץ, שירו לאדוני ברכו שמו, מסרו מיום ליום ישועתו. שירו לאדוני ברכו שמו, מסור ביום ליום ישועתו. שירו לאדוני, שירו שיר חדש, שירו לאדוני כל הארץ. I just realized I never turned my page.
Yeah, that's okay. We got a little extra. That's cool. Where's our bottom
I
of
was
page
thinking, it's like,
132?
didn't we just do this song as I'm going through?
We got more time. It's good. It's good. More Kabbalat Shabbat is good.
Little extra Shabbat.
Always good play.
That sounds better. Or zarua latzadik ulishrei lev simcha. Or zarua latzadik ulishrei lev simcha. Or zarua latzadik ulishrei lev simcha. Ulishrei lev simcha. Or zarua latzadik ulishrei lev simcha. Ulishrei lev simcha. Ya la la la, ya la ya la, ya la ya la, ya la, ya la la la, ya la la la, ya la ya la.
Turn now to the top of page 134.
We have a new melody this week as well for Zamru Ladonai B'chinor, coming from Jerusalem itself, from a man named Yoel Sykes as part of Navat Tehillah. Zamru Ladonai B'chinor, B'chinor. Zamru l'Adonai b'chinor, b'chinor v'kol zimra. Zamru l'Adonai b'chinor, Zamru l'Adonai b'chinor, b'chinor v'kol zimra. Zamru l'Adonai b'chinor, b'chinor v'kol zimra. Zamru l'Adonai b'chinor, b'chinor v'kol zimra.
We'll turn now to page 135, Romamu, which is the last Hebrew paragraph in the middle of the page.
Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu lehar kodsho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu lehar kodsho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu Romemu. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu Romemu.
Turn now to page 138 for Lechado D. And just a reminder, we'll do the first, second, fifth, and ninth paragraphs. And for the final paragraph, if you're here with us, we'll rise and face towards the rear of the room.
I just threw my guitar pick somewhere. I'll find it later.
I'll take a look.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Okay, we're finding. Sorry. New to me. Just learned it. Lechadodi. There we go. Likrat kala. Bene Shabbat. Mekabela. Lechadodi. Likrat kala. Bene Shabbat. Mekabela. שמור וזכור בדיבור אחד, השמיענו אל המיוחד, אדוני אחד ושמו אחד, לשם ולתפארת ותהילה לך דודי. לקראת כלה בני שבת נקבלה לך דודי. לקראת כלה בני שבת נקבלה. לקראת שבת לכו ונלכה, כי היא מקור הברכה, מראש מקדם נסוכה, סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה לך דודי. לקראת כלה בני שבת נקבלה לך דודי. לקראת כלה בני שבת נקבלה. Verse 5. התעוררי, התעוררי, כי באורך קומי אורי, אורי אורי שיר דברי, כבוד אדוני עלייך נגלה לך דודי. לקראת כלה בני שבת נקבלה לך דודי. לקראת כלה בני שבת נקבלה. בואי ושלום נטהרת בלה, גם בשמחה ובצהלה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה, בואי חלה, בואי חלה. לך דודי. לקראת כלה בני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי. לקראת כלה בני שבת נקבלה.
Okay, please be seated. We're now on page 140.
מזמור שיר ליום השבת, מזמור שיר ליום השבת. טוב להודות לאדוני ולזמר לשמך עליון, להגיד בבוקר חסדך ואמונתך בלילות, עלי השר ועלי נבל, עלי היגיון וכינור, להגיד בבוקר חסדך ואמונתך בלילות, עלי השר ועלי נבל, עלי היגיון וכינור. מזמור שיר ליום השבת, מזמור שיר ליום השבת. טוב להודות לאדוני ולזמר לשמך עליון, להגיד בבוקר חסדך ואמונתך בלילות, עלי הסור ועלי נבל, עלי היגיון וכינור.
We'll turn now to page 144 for the Chatzi Kaddish, and we'll rise in body or in spirit. Again, page 144. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
V'amad yivrach chirutei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael b'gala b'gala ובזמן קריב הימרו, אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך, לעולם לעלמי עלמיה, יתברך, יתברך וישתבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי דקודשה בריחו, לילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה בנחמתה, דמירן בעלמה, ויאמרו Amen. Remain standing for the Baruch Hu on page 146. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed. Please be seated. We'll read together now in English on the top of page 149. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Your wisdom sets the way on which time and season glide. Your breath guides the sail of the stars. Creator of the tide of time and light, you guide the current of day into night. As heaven spans to infinity, you set its course for eternity. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows.
ומעביר יום ומעביר לילה, מבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו, אל חי וקיים, תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה אדוני, המעריב ורביב.
Amen. We'll turn now to page 150, and we'll read together in English at the bottom of the page. Everlasting love you offered your people Israel, by teaching us Torah and mitzvot, laws and precepts. Therefore, Adonai our God, when we lie down and when we rise up, we will meditate on your laws and your commandments. We will rejoice in your Torah forever. Day and night we will reflect on them, for they are our life, and doing them lengthens our days. Never remove your love from us. Praise to you, Adonai, who loves your people Israel.
כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, והם נגע יומם ולילה, ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Please join us on page 154. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ושוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם לאות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. And we'll turn now to page 157. We'll read together in English at the top of the page, and if you're standing, you may be seated. Standing, well, I guess that I tell you to sit down, and the first word I say to read is standing. Timing is everything. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot. That wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. As we turn to page 158, Mi Chamocha at the top of the page.
באלים אדוני מי כמוך נדר וקודש נורא תהילות וספלת נורא תהילות וספלת מלכותך ראו בניך בוקע ים לפני משה ומרים זה אלינו ואמרו זה אלינו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד ונאמר גיבדה אדוני את יעקב וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו ברוך אתה אדוני גאל 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 ישראל.
We'll turn now to page 160, Hashkivenu at the very top of the page.
Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu Lishalom V'hamidenu Shomreinu L'chaim Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu Lishalom V'hamidenu Shomreinu L'chaim Ushmor Tzeiteinu Uvoeinu L'chaim u'Lishalom Me'ata ve'ad olam Hashkivenu Adonai אלוהינו לשלום, והעמידנו מלכנו לחיים.
Blessed are you, Adonai, guardian of Israel, whose shelter of peace is spread over us, over all your people, Israel, and over Yerushalayim. As we turn to page 162 at the very top. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. איי איי ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת שבת ויהי נפש. Invite us now to rise in body or spirit as we begin the Amidah together on page 164. As always, from that point on, we'll continue silently. If at the end you're still standing, you may be seated. Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi yagid tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise.
עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל.
We'll turn now to page 371 as we offer our Mishaberach, our healing prayer for this evening. And in addition to the names that I'm going to read in a moment, of course, we're continuing to extend our prayers and our hearts to our brothers and our sisters living in the land of Israel, and certainly a lot of things to pray for. But in our community tonight, we're thinking of Benzi Tepper, Allison Luckman, Malka Bat Chaya Sura, Michael Klinghofer, Ame Cass, Warren Cass, Rivka Bat Rachel, Leah Bat Naomi, Gedalia Ben Sylvia, Lorraine Danis, David Dowling, Sivia Devora Bat Francis, Muriel Hirsch, Michelle Sawicki, Francis Kirschman, Shelley Newmark, Diane Axelrod, Gabriella Spicer, Barbara Kushner, David Kyle Klotman, Lorraine Davis, Michoel Ben Chananya, Devora Bat Sima, Rebecca Snyder, Jeffrey Miller, Shelley Lyman, Deborah Block-Kroll, Sylvia Orn, Stanley Rappaport, Karen Layton, Debbie Bookvar, Carol Javna, Lori Nisanoff, Roberta Kyle, Miriam Batchaya, Dina Batchana, Rebecca Rubin, Miriam Levy, Deborah and John Fogarty, Kate Kessler, Hilda Mintz, John Mahoney, and Kim Birnbaum. In addition to the names that I just read, if anyone who's with us here tonight has any additional names to share, we'll start to the front and move towards the rear.
All right, Pastor.
That'll be a little bit later. This is the healing prayer, but I'll make sure. No problem. That my confusion more than anything else. But don't worry, we got you covered. We're on page 371. We'll join with the cantor in the middle of the page.
Source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
right, Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat
Cantor,
shalom.
take a little bit of a break. So tonight, last 2 weeks, I've spoken about Israel with some intensity, both things that were going on in terms of the judicial reforms and also of the violence in particular of last week. And I wish I could say that this week had been different, but it was a week again of a lot of violence and a lot of people yelling across each other, which of course is disheartening. So I thought tonight that I would go back to teaching a little bit and to teach something that I go to from time to time when I find that the world around me is feeling pretty crazy, and I'm trying to ground myself in some of our more core traditional texts, especially those that influence our way of thinking about how we as individuals behave, and therefore, if we can kind of get our own selves under control, that perhaps that will have a rippling out effect to our wider communities and ultimately to the world around. And I also have a secondary purpose of this, which is to teach about maybe a person that is less familiar and a book that is maybe less known, unless you are a regular Musar participant with Myra, in which case it may sound a little bit more familiar. So I'll just start by asking those in the room, does the name Moshe Chaim Lutzato mean anything to? Okay, there you go. That's a sign that Linda has been in the Musar class. Very good. Okay, if I were just to say the last name Lutzato, where do we think this particular rabbi is coming from geographically? I mean, Josie, I'm going to look to you here as our resident Italian. Okay, this is an Italian rabbi. This is for you. Okay, he's not Sicilian, but he's Venetian. We can forgive him for that. So Luzzato actually is one of the great rabbis of all time. He was considered as a child to be a prodigy, a genius. His teacher learned basically when he was like 12 or 13 years old that he was already almost surpassed by the student. So by 15 years old, he was studying Kabbalah deeply. And for those that know anything about Kabbalah, you're not actually really supposed to study it until you are much older, largely because it's containing all sorts of complex, esoteric ideas, those that may influence a young person to think a little bit too out there for a lot of the rabbis, especially who are trying to train a student from very young to getting to that point. So he again was sort of already well ahead of his time, and he is known as a great Kabbalist, but his book that is known as Mesilat Yesharim is actually considered to be one of the great works of Musar literature. Musar within Judaism is really focused on ethical behavior. It is a long-standing concept. It's existed in Jewish teaching for a really long time, but it took on a sort of preeminence at a certain point in history, largely 1700s and beyond. And especially in the Hasidic world, is considered to be mandatory learning alongside of Mishnah and Gemara and Talmud and Torah and all of those other things. But it's not surprising to me that he's lesser known in a lot of our communities, and I want to share a little bit of the introduction to the book because he lays out why he wrote it in the first place. And it may surprise you, his beginning is almost humorous in its intention. And then a little bit of the third chapter, which I think is particularly germane to at least where I find myself right now in the world, and I hope will have some resonance for all of you. So again, he's born in the early 1700s. This book is produced actually in Amsterdam, if I remember correctly, not until a little bit later on in his life. But so he writes this in the introduction, which is actually common course for rabbis writing any kind of book. You have to justify its existence. You have to explain why this book exists in any form or the other. So if you're ever curious about rabbis of various kinds, spend some time in their intros. Don't skip over it, because it will actually give you a real insight into what their cultural context was, what their historical context was, what their teachers' names and who ultimately influenced them, and so on. Okay, but here again he starts out fairly simple, almost too simple, but like most simple things, it's actually very complex. So he says, I have composed this work not to teach people what they do not know, but to remind them of what they already know and which is very familiar to them. So it doesn't start out in the most compelling kind of way. He's basically saying, you don't really actually need this book, but I wrote it anyway. So why did he write it? For you will find in most of my words, right, only things which most people already know and do not have any doubt about. But according to their familiarity and to the extent that their truth is evident to all, so too is their neglect very prevalent and forgetfulness of them very great. In other words, it's so obvious, so well known, that people forget because they take it for granted. Therefore, he says, the benefit to be gleaned from this book is not from a single reading, for it is possible that the reader will learn little that he didn't already know. Rather, the benefit derived from this book comes from review and from diligent study. For then he will be reminded of these things which, by nature, people tend to forget, and he will be able to put his heart and his duties, which he hides from, at the forefront. Now, if you reflect, and he's writing again in the 1700s, on the current state of affairs in most of the world, you will see most people of quick intelligence and sharp mentality, in other words, people of a sort of high intellect or involved in the kind of academic or high rabbinic world, they devote most of their thought and interest in the subtleties of wisdom, the depths of analysis, every person according to their intellectual tendency and natural desire. There are those who toil greatly in studying the creation and nature. Others devote all their study to astronomy and mathematics or to the arts. There are those which enter closer towards the sacred, namely the study of the Holy Torah. And among those who some occupy themselves with halachic analysis, in other words, Jewish law, others with midrash, others with legal decisions. But few are those which devote thought and study to the matter of perfecting divine service. Divine service, in other words, how we serve God. On the topics of love, of fear, of clinging to God, and the other branches of piety, of Chassidut. This is not because they do not consider these things as fundamental, for if you were to ask them, each one will answer you and say, this, of course, is of the utmost importance. All of these things, on service, on love, on fear, on clinging, all these things, okay? And that it's unimaginable for one to be considered truly wise, to be a chacham, if they have not fully comprehended all of these matters. However, rather, their lack of devoting more attention to it stems from its being so familiar and so evident to them that they see no need for spending much time on it. Okay, so just as we said, because it's so easy, because it's so fundamental, it becomes forgotten. The situation, he says, has reached the point where most people imagine that piety of Chassidut consists of reciting many psalms, very long confessions, difficult fasts, and immersions in ice water and snow. That one I'm not so familiar with, but we'll give him credit on that one. All are things that are incompatible with intellect and which reason cannot find peace. And thus, the true piety that is acceptable and cherished is far from what our minds conceive to us. For it is obvious that which a person does not feel a responsibility to do does not occupy a place on his mind. Although the beginnings and foundations of piety are already implanted in every upright person's heart, nevertheless, if he does not engage himself in their study, he will encounter its branches, but won't recognize them, and he will tread over them without perceiving that he is even doing so. So, just to point out one thing in terms of the title, the word yashar in Hebrew means straight, means to go in a straight order. So if you're ever in Israel and you're trying to tell a cab driver where you want him to go, yashar is very important. Okay, but it's also useful in another thing that we tend to say. Does anybody remember somebody does something great up on the bima, right? Reads Torah, has an aliyah. What do we yell out at them usually? 2 words in Hebrew. Anybody remember? Very good. Very good. Yashar koach. Okay, we say yashar koach. We say it fast and we say it Ashkenazi, but yashar koach means literally that you should move forward, basically move straight with strength, but it implies actually that the upright is the term here. The yashar is not just straight in a linear path. It refers basically to our best upstanding person. So a person who is yashar is going to be somebody who's on, quote unquote, the straight and narrow, right? The path that leads us forward in the right direction. Okay, but what is Luzzatto saying? Is that even the most pious people of his time, quote unquote, right? The Chassidut, the most sort of idealized version of Judaism in that era, the people who have reached the apex of that are the ones who study this stuff the least, because they've already gotten to a point in which they assume they've learned it, they live it, they know it, and therefore they don't need to return to it ever. Okay? So this is the basis for him writing this book, and he basically says there's nothing new in this. There's nothing, explosive. There's no grand scheme here. This is actually a very simple text, and the only way that you will learn anything from it is if you pick it up throughout the year, even in some cases every day, right? A little bit of study, a little bit of focus should sound familiar to Linda from Myra's class, because a lot of Musar is based on that idea of regular, diligent study, not just of text, but of the self. Okay, so now I want to skip to chapter 3. I can't obviously give you the whole book, but I want to give you just a little taste of something that I think, again, is really quite helpful. So he starts to talk in practical terms, and he says, for anybody who lifkach al atzmo, who wants to essentially, watch over oneself, right? To be careful about one's behavior, they must take two matters into account. They have to investigate two things within the self, okay? The first, that person should contemplate what is truly good for human beings and to choose that which is good and to identify the things that are evil and to flee from them. The second, on the actions which he does, right, a person does on any daily basis, to determine if those actions that we've already taken are in the category of good or of evil. In other words, to take stock of behaviors that we have already done and to consider actions that we may take into the future. As he says, this applies both to the times when he's in the act of doing it itself and when not in the act of doing. And he goes so far as to say that actually every action that you take, you should think beforehand, is the action I'm taking now a good one or a bad one? Every little thing that you do all day long. That may be a little extreme for most of us, but it's something to shoot for. He says, when in the act of doing, that he not do any act without first weighing it on the scales of this understanding, and not in the act of doing that he bring up before himself the remembrance of his deeds in general, and weigh them like on a scale. Likewise in these scales to determine whether they contain evil in order to relinquish it, and of what is good in order to perpetuate it and strengthen himself in it. And if he finds in them of the evil, he should then contemplate and investigate, reasoning out a strategy to employ in order to turn away from that evil and cleanse himself of it. So in other words, it is what will be familiar again in Musar class, what's called a cheshbon hanefesh, literally an accounting of the soul, is meant to happen, as he says, not just in the moment and not just retroactively, both, and not just in the case, again, of good behaviors or bad behaviors, but to identify and to really to hold up both as examples. And if one should do something wrong, right, either in the present tense or in the past tense, to work on that and to consider what are the things that went wrong, what was my part in it, how am I going to make sure it doesn't happen again, and go on. Great preparation, by the way, for Yom Kippur, in case you're thinking that far ahead of time. So he skips ahead a little bit, and he says the general principle that a person should inspect all of their deeds and watch over all their ways to not leave for themselves any bad habit or bad trait, all the more so any transgression or sin. I see a need, he says, for a man to be meticulous and to weigh his ways each and every day like the great merchants who continuously evaluate all of their business matters in order that they do not degenerate. He should fix definite times and hours for this weighing so that it's not haphazard, but rather with the greatest regularity, for it yields the greatest results. So he uses the example of a business person who regularly, as part of their business, in order to make sure that, for example, you're a store owner, you want to make sure something is not going rotten, somebody didn't steal my stuff, a regular kind of practice that every one of us in various professions have, that we are just used to, that we do day to day regularly. And he's saying that if you make this, sort of exercise only the thing that happens once in a while, it's not going to be effective. It has to be something that you actually set aside your time to really do. So he continues, this is what our sages said, and he quotes ultimately from Psalms and ultimately from the Talmud. He says, God, you make darkness, and it is night. Now, what does this mean? This refers to the world which is analogous to night. Okay, that's a complex rabbinic thing of an introduction, but focus less on that and more on the concept of night itself. He says, how wondrous is this truthful statement to one who delves deeply to understand it? For behold, the darkness of night causes man's eyes to err in two ways. It covers the eye so that they cannot see at all what is before them, or it deceives him so that a pillar appears as if it is a man, or a man as a pillar. So too the material and physicality of this world. Behold, it is darkness of night to the eye of the intellect, and causes him to err on two fronts. First, it prevents a person from seeing the stumbling blocks standing in the way of this world, and thus, those of us who are not paying attention, we will walk confidently and fall. We will ultimately trip over the things that we don't see in front of us. But here is the much more important piece, and this is what I've been driving at. The second error, the one in which he says, in darkness, we mistake, right, a person for a pillar and a pillar for a person. He says the second error, and this is even worse than the first, is that darkness distorts sight until we literally see evil as if it were good and good as if it were evil. Thus, they strengthen in clenching to their evil ways. For not only do they lack the proper vision to see the truth, to perceive the evil right in front of their eyes, but they also see fit to conjure up great proofs and convincing evidences to support their evil logic and false ideas. This is the great evil, says Luzzatto, which envelops them and clings to them, carrying them to the abyss of destruction. So what is he ultimately saying, right? What is so concerning about the behavior of people who lack the sort of fundamental practice that he's describing here, the ones who don't spend a regular basis considering, are my actions good, are my actions bad, on a very simple level. But what's really dangerous is not the simple view of this. It's what happens to us eventually, in which we start to see the bad things as good. We start to justify bad behaviors as good behaviors because we did them. Judaism is rife with all sorts of teachings that one can pull out at any given moment in time to justify behaviors. Some of the worst behaviors, of which I talked about last week, taking place in our name, in our homeland, across the world, that are then justified after the fact by being, distorting, to say the very least, right? Have become so blind through hatred, have become so blind through the pain and the suffering that they have endured, that now what are truly evil acts are being justified, right? Not just by politicians, but as I said last week, by rabbis, by religious leaders, and not just us, right? This is a worldwide problem in which all of us are guilty at some point or another, in which we do wrong, but rather than admitting that wrong, rather than trying to consider the possibility that we have negatively affected another person or another situation or another community or whatever it might be, we rationalize it. We justify it. Every one of us has done this in our lives. Some of us do it regularly. I'm going to put anybody else on the spot. I will put my hand up. Okay, I'm as guilty of this as anyone else. And what I think fundamentally Luzzatto was thinking about when he wrote this book, as he said, was that even amongst us, right, the rabbi of the community standing up and saying that I am not as conscious of the things that I do wrong, and in particular when I do something wrong, that the first instinct is to try to justify it so I don't have to feel bad about it. Okay, this is a deeply problematic reality for all of us just as human beings, but it's especially dangerous in situations like what we see each and every day of conflict. Because in the end, right, left, center, up, down, it doesn't make a difference. There is nobody who is free from this kind of behavior, in which we justify after the fact, and in which we are not willing to even begin to admit our culpability in almost all things that turn into the negative. Now, his book is not a negative book. His book is actually meant to do the opposite. It's simply meant to remind us that when the world feels complex and overwhelming, go back to fundamentals. Go back to simple questions. Am I doing something good or am I doing something bad? And if I've done something bad, what am I going to do about it? Not just to make a tikkun, a repair of the damage that I've caused, but what am I going to do within the self to make sure I don't do that again in the future? In essence, his book is the playbook for life. His entire teaching is so simple and yet so profound because of how much we all walk sideways away from responsibility. And as he says, if all we do, for example, is show up on Yom Kippur, say I'm sorry, and go back to doing the things that we've done wrong all year long, we've missed the point entirely. And the real route of the pious, of the righteous, is not the guy who has the biggest talis or the biggest payas, right? Not the guy who knows all of the Hebrew prayers by heart, not the guy who's davening the Psalms. It's not those guys necessarily, because you can do all of those things and still be a terrible human being. And you could do the opposite, right? Be the least learned person in the world, but know the difference between right and wrong, between good and bad, and to choose whenever possible to do the good, and to be responsible enough to say, if I make a mistake and I do something wrong, I'm not going to justify it, I'm not going to rationalize it, I'm not going to pull some quote from a far-flung text to say that this was acceptable when it's not, simply not. And I think one of the challenges that I see within just our world here is that I don't think we spend the day-to-day thinking about these things. I think we push ourselves forward, the world pushes us forward, we're all exhausted, we're all overworked, we're all tired, we're all hurt, and it's very easy to simply say at the end of a hard day, at least I'm not as bad as that guy. Okay? We don't have to think of it in comparative sense. The real question is, am I a better person today than I was yesterday? And if not, why not? And what can I do in practical terms between today and tomorrow and the next day after that and the day after that that's going to put me on the right path, right? The straightforward path that's going to take me to a better place and that's going to take all of us to a better place. And I think right now we are definitely living through a time, and as Luzzatto said, right, he's right in the 1700s about the same situation. We haven't made much progress. If anything, we've walked backwards. So I think this is a call to all of us to really consider, again, not the big complicated things, but let's start working on some of the fundamental things. Is our behavior good, and is it bad? And if we can do better, then we ought to do better. And if we can learn from our mistakes, then we should do it. But be very careful about that slippery slope that says my mistakes are not my fault, they're someone else's. Sometimes that's the case. Maybe oftentimes that's the case, but not always. And if we can't take responsibility for our own behavior, I can't imagine what standing we have to start pointing the finger at others. Let's start with the simple and build toward the complex. And if anybody would like to study more, again, Musar, we happen to have a wonderful Musar teacher here at the temple, and Myra is teaching that class. It's a great one to sign up for sure. So with that, I wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom, and we'll welcome Cantor Kevin back up to the Bima as we turn to page 586 at the bottom of the page. And we'll invite everyone to rise in body or spirit. Again, page 586 at the very bottom. Aleinu leshabeach ladon hakol, latet gedula liotzer breshit, shelo asanu kegoye ha'aratzot, velo samanu kemishpachot ha'adama, shelo sam chelkenu kahem, vegor aleinu kechol hamonam, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. Page 591. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. Now invite those in mourning and those observing a yard site to please remain standing. Everyone else may be seated at this time. We think of those who passed in our community in recent months: Martin Blake, Sandy Greenwald, Jane Beard Cass, Dorothy Klein, Buddy Kossoff, Helene Krotman, Emmanuel Kiprios, David Lieberman, Norma Polsek, Marvin Schreier, Anita Sheldon, Alan Silver, Sandy Slip, Larry Wartor, Rita Weitzman, and Yael Zerdar. We also mark the yard sites that occurred during the last week for Stanley Acker, Leonard Barretts, Hal Bergman, Marie Cherish, Philip Chester, Arthur Cohen, Edith Cohen, Rose Decker, Molly Fleischer, Jesse Futterman, Ida Goldfarb, Chaim Bear Greenwald, Jerry Hirsch, Harry Katz, Elsie Chris, Sarah Kruger, Nettie Levin, Shirley Moskowitz, Ted Ronick, Michael Ruckin, Seidel Saltzman, Henrietta Samborn, Jeanette Schwartz, Diane Savanak, Grace Sofer, Peggy Tishman, Ira Bruce Tempowski, and Kenneth Brown. Is anyone else saying Kaddish for anyone tonight that we want to mention? I invite those at home that are watching, of course, to add names of your loved ones as well, and I'll invite the mourners to join with me on page 598. And page 598, the mourner's Kaddish at the very top of the page. Yitkadal ve'yitkadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Be'alma divra chirutei ve'amlich malchutei b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael ba'agala u'bizman kariv ve'imru Amen.
Amen.
Yehei Shemei Rabba Mevarach La'alam U'li'almei Almaya. Yit Barach V'yishtabach V'yit Pa'ar V'yit Romam V'yit Naseh V'yit Hadar V'yit Ale V'yit Halal Shemei Dekudsha Berichu. Le'ela Min Kol Birchata B'shirata Tushbechata V'nechamata Ta'amiran Be'alma V'imru Amen. Yehei Shalama Rabba Min Shemaya V'chaim Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen.
Amen.
Oseh Shalom Bimramav Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen.
Amen.
Zichronam Livracha, may every one of their memories be for a blessing. Okay, please be seated. And again, wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom. So, Shelly, I might have lost the announcement sheet, so I'm going to do the best from my memory as to what's going on. First is you can join us for Shabbat services tomorrow morning at 9:30 if you're joining us here at the Whalers Church. Just a reminder again, the entrance is through the side of the building, and we're in the small chapel space. And of course, to join us for Torah study on Zoom at 12 o'clock. Shelly, anything on Sunday that you know of? Wonderful. So, for those who remember, again, I hope everyone, by the way, had a wonderful Purim. As part of our Mishloach Manot and our Matanot Le'Evyonim in particular, we really, I think, how many bags did we end up? 37 bags? So 37 families that we're helping to give just a little bit of extra help this time of year. And if I'm not mistaken, our Hebrew school students were the ones who really packed all those bags during the Purim party, which was great.
Wow.
Really wonderful. And I really credit to Shelley for a great party on Monday. A lot of wonderful kids, even some new members, I think, that are going to come from it, and some great new kids. And for those that didn't see a giant dancing Pokemon that may or may not have been your rabbi, maybe.
How were the glow sticks?
What was that?
Was it glow?
There
Right?
was it didn't exactly. There was a glow party. The Pikachu was an entirely different thing, but
Okay.
that
I just connect the two for whatever
I
reason.
think it probably did glow, actually. But the truth is, inside of it, you have absolutely no idea. I was just struggling to stay alive. But the kids were having a great time, so it was really very
Good.
funny. But really, really wonderful stuff. So the rest of the week, normal Monday. So my Heschel class at 12 o'clock. Nida Mitzvah, I think, is still meeting at 11:30. Hebrew school at 3 o'clock or 3:30. SJC, I think, has its regular call on Zoom that evening at 5. Oh, thank you for reminding me. Post-B'nai Mitzvah class, Monday as well, one of my all-time favorites, So what year were you bar mitzvah? Do you remember? 2008. That's when I started rabbinical school. Boy, that's, this is like, imagine when you were like after B'nai Mitzvah, that age kids coming back and still hanging out with their rabbi, which is always a good sign. That's, makes me very happy. It's very sweet. Okay, so anybody who's interested in the Mary Cassatt movie, we're sending out the link to be able to watch it. That'll be coming out this on Sunday, you said, right? Okay, the film discussion itself will be on Thursday at 7 o'clock. Okay. I should have just given you the mic, because that would have made much more sense. But, it's good practice, executive director feeding the rabbi. And of course, a lot of other great things coming up. And any, building-related stuff this week, Shelley, because that's always been a fun thing this week. Yeah, I think we have furniture in some of the offices, which is exciting. Yes, toilets are very important. I think, I don't think they had them in the Mishkan originally, but we're very happy to be able to have them, accessible bathrooms and everything. Oh, see, that's a big deal. I feel like once that starts happening, then it really feels like a real building. It's kind of hard to imagine it if you can't drive into it. But, and the truth is, it'll be a while, because we have to plant and all the stuff will eventually grow over time. It won't be even its full realized form probably until next year. But, Oh, that's great. Yeah, it's spring planting, I would assume. That's really exciting. So, we're going to be back in there sooner than later. So,
I look forward to seeing it.
yeah, I know. Kevin, again,
Still
has
haven't seen
no
it.
sense, no imagination of it whatsoever. But
No idea.
But you guys, up until the temple was torn down, it looked exactly as you remember it from 2008. I promise you. Like, literally nothing changed other than the rabbi. It was still the same. So, a lot of good stuff coming up for sure. All right, so before we end with Kiddush and Motzi, just a reminder again, if you have a prayer book and you're with us here tonight, when you're leaving, if you could just bring it out to Bob and Joe. And Cantor, I think we've got a closing song for this evening
do.
before Kiddush, so
We definitely do.
take it away.
I'm in connection with your sermon, especially speaking on what was the name of the
Mesilat Yesharim.
Mesilat Yesharim. So I'm going to take the word Yeshar that you spoke about and put it the words of Or Zarua as well. So if you're looking for those words specifically, page 647, Or Zarua la tzadik ula yishrei lev simcha.
Very good.
So Or Zarua la tzadik, light is sown for the righteous, and le yishrei lev, those who are straight or upright of heart, simcha, there will be joy for them. And so we have a different melody as well. And we'll just see how much people remember, because I thought this at the very beginning of the year
Literally,
outside on the
it's
lawn.
the first thing, I think.
I think
that
it
you-
was, yeah.
I
And
think
so
the first thing you taught, which is
since we're talking about moving back into the building
There you
somewhat
go.
soon, I want to keep this fresh in people's minds,
Good.
because I really want
Good.
this to stick.
good.
So let's see how this tuning is. Nice. Bum biddy bum 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 bum biddy bum. Part 2 goes like this. Na 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 So when we're in person, we'll get to hear both of those parts together with everyone's voices. But since we just don't have enough people in my mind in person to get those parts together, we'll just move right on to the words. Or zaru ala tzadik uleishrei lev simcha. 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 Namana, 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 namana. Bum biddy bum 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 bum.
We'll rise for Kiddush on page 123. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam mohorei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu b'shabbat kodsho b'ahava uvratzon inchilanu zikaron lema'aseh v'reishit כי הוא יום תחילה למקראי קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים, כי בנו בחרת, ואותנו קידשת, מכל העמים, בשבת קודשך, באהבה וברצון הנחלתנו. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh ha-Shabbat. Amen. Okay, l'chaim. Good Shabbos, everybody. And
Motzi?
Yashkoch.
Motzi?
Motzi. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. Now I can say Shabbat Shalom.
Now Shabbat Shalom. Now that you have
Good job
food in your
as a-
mouth.
Right.